The storm raged without mercy across the frozen plains of Vera 9, a moon of endless ice and shadow. Wind screamed through the jagged cliffs, carrying sheets of snow that cut like shards of glass. The world was white and empty, save for the smoking wreck of a small human corvette half buried in the drifts. The resolute Dawn had fallen from the sky after a brutal chase in orbit, its hull torn open, flames frozen mid-dance in the bitter cold. Inside the cracked cockpit, Captain Elias Ward forced himself to move. Pain burned across his ribs, his helmet visor was shattered, and every joint in his body ached. But he was alive, and that was enough for now. He pulled himself free from the wreckage, stumbling into the blinding storm. Each breath froze in his lungs, the icy wind threatening to kill him faster than his wounds. Still he pressed forward, scanning the white void around him. Something tugged at his instincts, a faint flicker of movement in the snow. At first he thought it was his mind playing tricks, the way shadows sometimes seemed alive in blizzards. But then he saw them, two shapes half buried in the drift not 20 meters away. His heart jolted. They were not human. Their skin glowed faintly blue against the snow, their limbs too long, their faces strange yet delicate. They lay motionless, their chests rising shallowly, their silvery eyes closed against the storm. Without a second thought, Elias staggered toward them, falling to his knees and digging with numb hands. His gloves tore, his fingers bled, but he refused to stop. He dragged the first figure free, then the second, hauling their slender bodies across the snow toward the wreck of his ship. Every step was agony. The storm beat against him. The cold threatened to devour him, and the weight of both strangers nearly dropped him into the ice. Yet he gritted his teeth and pushed on, whispering to himself, "Just a little more. Just hold on." He managed to force the emergency hatch open and pulled them inside, the warm flicker of backup heaters spilling weak light across the cramped interior. The hull groaned as the wind slammed outside, but it was shelter enough. Elias wrapped them in thermal blankets, pressed heat packs against their frozen skin, and whispered words of comfort, though he doubted they understood his language. Their breathing remained shallow, their lips trembling as if death already reached for them. He leaned close, checking for signs of life, praying his effort had not been too late. Time dragged. Minutes became hours, and exhaustion nearly pulled Elias into unconsciousness. Yet he forced himself to keep watch, feeding power to the heaters, replacing packs as they cooled. At last a faint sound stirred the silence. A voice soft as falling snow. "You saved us." "Human," one of them whispered. Her eyes flickered open, glowing faintly silver in the dim light. The second stirred soon after, reaching for his hand with trembling fingers. Her voice broke as she tried to speak. "Our people will not forget this." Elias stared at them both, their alien features strange and beautiful against the glow of the heaters. He was too tired to feel pride, too weary to wonder at their origins. He only gave a tired smile, his cracked lips barely moving. "Don't thank me yet," he said quietly. "We're not out of danger." The storm howled outside louder than before, as if to prove his words true. When the storm finally eased and the ice moon revealed its pale sky once more, Elias was already moving through the damaged corridors of his ship, making repairs by hand. Sparks hissed from broken panels, wires hung loose, and the air smelled faintly of burned plastic. Behind him, in the small med bay, the two alien women were slowly recovering, their strength returning with each passing hour. They had given him their names, Lyra and Calith, and though their words were heavy with an accent, Elias found he could understand them well enough. Lyra, the elder, carried herself with calm and quiet grace, though he saw fear hidden in her eyes whenever she spoke of the past. Calith was different, her spirit sharp, fiery, and restless, like a storm held in human shape. It was from them that Elias learned the truth. They were not wanderers nor simple travelers. They were the daughters of the High Regent of the Valari Dominion, an empire that stretched across half the Orion Spur, a name known even to distant Earth. Their ship had been attacked during a diplomatic journey. The attackers were not pirates nor rebels, but something far worse, the Dravak swarm. Elias had heard whispers of them before. Rumors passed between pilots and soldiers, but hearing their names spoken aloud by the daughters of a galactic ruler made the air feel colder. The Dravak were not like humans or the Valari. They were insectoid creatures vast in number, consuming everything they touched. They did not bargain. They did not surrender. They were a tide of destruction that stripped worlds down to bone and dust. It was said they had swallowed entire civilizations before, leaving nothing but silence in their wake. Lyra's voice trembled when she spoke of the ambush that shattered their ship. Kaleth clenched her fists as she recalled the way the swarm ships descended from the void, black and endless, spitting fire until their guards were slain, and their craft fell screaming toward the moon. Elias listened in silence, a deep knot forming in his chest. The crash, the storm, his own survival, none of it had been chance. The Dravak were hunting and the sisters were their prey. That meant he was now part of this war, whether he wished it or not. As if to confirm his thoughts, the scanner console blared its warning. Elias hurried to the cockpit, the sisters following close, their robes swaying in the flicker of damaged lights. On the screen, dozens of red blips appeared, moving fast, cutting across orbit toward the ice moon. The swarm had found them. The sisters froze, their faces pale, but Elias only cursed under his breath and slammed his hands on the controls. His ship was battered, scarred, and barely fit to fly, but he had no intention of waiting on the ground to be torn apart. Engines groaned, lights flickered, but the resolute Dawn roared back to life, dragging itself up from the surface in a storm of fire and broken snow. As the Corvette clawed toward the stars, Lyra clutched the railing with trembling hands. "They will never stop," she whispered. "Not until we are dead." Kaleth's silver eyes burned with defiance as she shouted, "Then let them come. I will not die hiding." Elias set his jaw, his hand steady on the controls. "They want you?" he said, his voice hard and sharp as steel. "Then they'll have to go through me first, and with that..." The ship broke free of the clouds, rising into the darkness of space, where a swarm of enemies already waited, their black wings stretched across the stars. The resolute Dawn burst into the black of space, its engines screaming in protest as Elias forced the battered Corvette higher and higher, away from the deadly silence of the ice moon. The stars opened before them, scattered like shards of diamond across the endless dark. But there was no peace waiting beyond the storm. The Dravak swarm had already arrived. Their ships slid from the void like shadows given form, black and jagged with green fire pulsing beneath their armor, each vessel moving with a hunger that felt alive. They were not ships in the human sense, they were living machines, half organic, half metal, a nightmare race born for war. Elias gritted his teeth as the scanners filled with hostile signatures, far too many for one old Corvette to face. He felt the sisters behind him standing silent, their fear almost heavy enough to taste, but his hands moved without hesitation across the cracked controls. The Dawn jolted forward, and the first barrage of enemy fire screamed past, cutting the dark with streaks of poison green. The shields flared weakly, but Elias knew they wouldn't survive many hits. He spun the ship hard to starboard, pulling maneuvers no sane pilot would attempt, skimming along the rings of a shattered asteroid, diving through debris clouds where jagged rocks spun like knives. The Dawn weaved between them, scraping and groaning, but Elias guided her like an extension of his own body. He had flown through worse, or at least he told himself that to keep the fear down. Behind him, the sisters clung to the railing as the ship rolled and tumbled, but their silver eyes never left the display as the swarm followed. The Dravak hunters were fast, darting like predators through the field, spitting beams of green fire that shattered rock and split asteroids in two. One shot grazed the Dawn's hull, sending sparks bursting across the cockpit, filling the air with the acrid stench of burning circuits. Elias swore under his breath, spun the Corvette upside down, and loosed a spread of torpedoes into the pursuing formation. The explosions flared bright, and 3 of the hunters disintegrated into burning wreckage, their carcasses spinning into the rocks. For a brief moment the sisters gasped, hope flickering in their faces, but the swarm was endless. For every hunter he destroyed, 10 more appeared, pouring from the black as though the void itself was birthing them. The scanner screamed warnings until Elias shut it off, tired of listening to the ship cry about odds he already knew. Kaleth finally shouted over the chaos, her voice sharp as a blade. "Human, you are mad. No one flies like this." Her words were half fear, half awe, but Elias only barked back, "That's how we stay alive." He twisted the Dawn through a narrow gap between 2 colliding asteroids, scraping the hull so close that molten sparks danced along the viewport, then rolled the ship into a sudden dive that sent the hunters colliding with each other in a burst of fire. The elder sister Lyra could only whisper, "We cannot escape them. They will not stop. It is hopeless." Elias didn't even glance back, his eyes locked on the swarm ahead, his voice hard and unshaken. "Hopeless isn't in my dictionary. As long as I'm breathing, we fight. And if we fight, we live." The dawn shot forward, engines howling, chased by the endless tide of hunters. The void stretched out around them, stars flickering like distant candles, and in that vast dark, one broken human ship carried 3 souls clinging to the fragile thread of survival. Elias tightened his grip on the controls, sweat running down his brow, a thin smile cutting across his face even as death closed in. They wanted the sisters. They wanted the human ship. They wanted everything. But before the night was over, they would learn one thing: a human never runs forever. The call for help spread across the stars, carried on broken transmissions that crackled through the void, and soon the frozen moon of Vera 9 became the heart of something far larger than Elias could have imagined. The Valari fleet arrived first, their ships sleek and beautiful, long arcs of silver and white that shimmered against the blackness of space, each one armed with weapons of frightening precision. They came not only to protect their regent's daughters but also to defend their pride, for the Valari believed themselves to be one of the oldest and strongest civilizations of the Orion Spur. Yet even as they formed their defensive wall, the swarm pressed closer, their endless numbers blotting out the stars. Elias guided the resolute Dawn into the shadow of the fleet, his small vessel nothing compared to the giants now assembled, but his presence was not ignored. Word of the human captain who had pulled the regent's daughters from the snow spread quickly through the Valari ranks, and though many whispered that he was reckless and crude, none could deny his courage. Still, he saw their doubt, the way their officers looked down on him as though humanity was a child stumbling into a war too vast to understand. The Valari had never needed humans before, and they did not expect to need them now. But Elias knew better. The Dravak did not fear the Valari. Their swarm poured through space like a flood of shadow, ships upon ships, a tide so thick that scanners struggled to count their number. When the first wave struck, the Valari unleashed their weapons, beams of pure light that sliced through the void, torpedoes of plasma that turned hunters to ash, shields that bent like glass to deflect the worst of the storm. For a while it seemed as though their discipline and technology would hold, but Elias could see the truth through the fire. For every Dravak ship destroyed, another filled the gap. The swarm did not break, it did not falter, it did not retreat. Its purpose was hunger, and hunger had no end. The Valari fought with grace, but grace alone could not survive against the tide. Elias felt a grim fire rise inside him, and when the moment came, when the Valari lines began to waver, he opened a channel to Earth. His voice, steady despite the chaos, carried across the network. "This is Captain Elias Ward of the Resolute Dawn. Humanity is answering the call." Days later, the void trembled. The Iron Vanguard arrived. The fleet was nothing like the silver arcs of the Valari. These were human ships, old, scarred, patched together from wars long past. Their hulls were dark, their weapons crude railguns and missile racks, their engines loud and burning. To the Valari they looked like relics, blunt instruments from a primitive world. But when the swarm surged again, it was the humans who roared into the fight first. Nuclear fire blossomed across the stars, railguns cracked like thunder, and human ships hurled themselves headlong into the enemy with a ferocity that defied reason. They fought until their hulls broke, and then they fought still, ramming swarm carriers, detonating reactors and suicidal charges, turning their own deaths into weapons. The Valari, watching in awe and disbelief, saw something they had not expected. A species that refused to bow, a people who burned brighter when pressed against the wall. On the bridge of the Resolute Dawn, Lyra pressed a trembling hand to her lips as tears filled her silver eyes. "Your people, they fight like dying stars," she whispered, voice filled with awe and sorrow. Caleth's voice was sharp but soft with wonder as she said, "No, sister, they fight like they were born for this." Elias, his face lit by the glow of explosions, gave no speech, no proud claim, only a quiet nod as his hands danced over the controls. "This is what it means to be human," he said, his voice steady as iron, and then he drove the Dawn straight into the heart of the storm. The battle dragged on through endless hours, then days, the void itself burning with the clash of fleets. Human ships fought until they were torn apart. Valari cruisers shone like shattered stars as they collapsed under the weight of the swarm, and still the Dravak pressed forward with their endless hunger. The space around Vera 9 was littered with debris, broken hulls, frozen bodies, glowing fragments of worlds-long technology, drifting silently between bursts of fire. The defenders had given everything, but the swarm was not slowing. And then the darkness split apart to reveal something far worse than any had yet faced. The Dravak mothership emerged from the void like a living mountain, its vast hull pulsing with green light, its armored plates shifting like the hide of some terrible beast. It was larger than cities, perhaps even larger than continents, and its very presence filled the surviving fleets with dread. Its maw opened, glowing with power, and every sensor screamed the same truth. No wall of ships could hold against it, no fleet could stand, for this was the heart of the swarm. Elias stared at the monstrosity through the cracked glass of the Dawn's viewport, his hands frozen on the controls, and he knew then that their fight had only ever been leading to this. For a long moment no words came, only silence broken by the hum of failing systems, until Elias finally spoke, his voice low but clear. "There's only one chance left." The sisters turned toward him, their silver eyes wide, their faces pale from exhaustion and fear, and he continued with the calm of a man who had already made his choice. "We drive the Dawn into its core. We overload everything she has, every warhead, every missile, every coil of her heart, and we rip that thing apart from the inside." Lyra's breath caught as she whispered, "That is suicide." Kaleth's voice broke with anger. "We will not let you. You are not Valari, but you are ours. You cannot throw yourself away." Elias looked at them both, at the desperation in their eyes, and a sad smile touched his face. "Someone has to make the hole," he said softly. "If I break their shield, the others can strike. If I don't, then none of this matters. Humanity, Valari. All of us are gone." His words cut through them more deeply than any blade could, and for a moment the ship felt unbearably heavy with silence. Then Kaleth stepped forward, pressing her forehead against his, her silver eyes burning with fire even as they filled with tears. "If you die, human," she whispered, her voice shaking, "then know both of us would have chosen you." Lyra reached for his hand, her touch trembling but steady. "You will not be forgotten. You will live in our songs for as long as our stars burn." Elias did not answer. He only turned back to the controls, his hand steady as he forced the Dawn forward into the path of the Leviathan. Alarms screamed, the hull shook, flames burst through the corridors, but the ship roared into the mothership's open maw like a spear of fire. Hunters swarmed to intercept, but Elias cut them down with his last guns, firing until the barrels melted, until the ammo ran dry. Then, with a roar that shook the ship, he armed every warhead, every torpedo, every piece of fury the Dawn carried. The reactor screamed as he overloaded it, light spilling across the cockpit like the birth of a new star. In his final breath, Elias Ward gave no prayer, no farewell, only a single whisper carried to the void itself. For humanity. And then the Dawn erupted inside the heart of the mothership, tearing it open in a blaze so bright it turned the darkness into day. The swarm convulsed as their core shattered, their vast body cracking apart, their endless tide finally breaking as fire consumed their godlike vessel. The defenders, human and Valari alike, struck with all they had left, hammering the broken beast until it was nothing but ash scattered through the void. When the light of the explosion faded and the last echoes of battle drifted into silence, the void around Vera 9 was no longer a place of war, but of wreckage and ghosts. The swarm was broken, its endless tide scattered into fragments, its great mothership torn apart from the inside like a rotten fruit. What remained of the Valari fleet drifted in battered silence, their elegant hulls scarred and scorched, their once proud lines bent and broken. The human ships of the Iron Vanguard were fewer still, many nothing but burning wrecks, but those that survived hung in formation, scarred and proud, like wounded wolves refusing to bow. In the wreckage, rescue shuttles darted like small sparks of life among the dead, pulling survivors from drifting hulks, carrying the wounded back to the light of their flags. And against all reason, all logic, one battered form was found clinging to the edge of existence. Deep inside the debris of the resolute Dawn, Elias Ward lived. His body was broken, his ship destroyed beyond hope, but the fire of his heart had not gone out. Valari search crews dragged him from the ruin, and though his eyes were closed, his pulse still beat faint and stubborn, as if his will alone had kept death away. The sisters were at his side when he awoke days later, lying in a chamber of soft light aboard a Valari cruiser. His body was wrapped in healing fields, every movement heavy with pain. But when he opened his eyes and saw Lyra and Kaleth watching over him, he laughed softly through cracked lips. "Still here," he whispered, his voice rough as gravel. Lyra leaned forward, tears streaming down her face, whispering back, "By the stars, yes, still here." Caleth pressed his hand to her chest, her silver eyes blazing with fierce relief. "You are impossible, human. Even when you throw yourself into death, you crawl back to us." The war was over, but its cost was written across every star that burned above the battlefield. Humanity's fleets were shadows of what they had been. Valari cruisers shattered in numbers not seen for centuries, but together they had done what neither could have done alone. The Dravak swarm had been broken, not by machines of war nor ancient pride, but by the reckless courage of a human who refused to yield. Across the galaxy, stories spread of the battle at Vera 9. They spoke of the Valari daughters who lived, of the Regent's relief and the songs that were sung in their honor. But more than that, they spoke of the human captain who saved them, the one who had thrown himself into the heart of the swarm's beast and lived. On Valari worlds, children whispered his name with awe, and in human fleets, soldiers raised their cups in his memory, even though he still walked among them. For Elias, the glory meant little. He carried the weight of the fallen, the names of the ships that would never return, the faces of those who had burned alongside him. When he looked out from the recovery chamber window at the stars, he did not see victory, but sacrifice. Yet in that quiet sorrow, he also saw something brighter: unity. Humanity was no longer a child race in the eyes of the galaxy. They had proven their fire. They had proven that when all else fell, when no hope remained, humans would stand and fight until the void itself burned. The sisters never left his side. They argued often, as was their way, one calm and thoughtful, the other fierce and stubborn, each unwilling to let go of him. Sometimes Elias smiled at their quarrels. Sometimes he sighed, but deep down he knew that the bond forged in fire and snow could never be broken. They had been strangers buried in the ice when he first saw them, fragile lives fading in a storm. Now they were more than survivors, more than daughters of a regent. They were the reason he had lived, just as he had been the reason they survived. On the day he finally rose from the healing bed and took his first step onto solid ground, the galaxy was already whispering his name like a legend. Elias Ward, the human who saved the Sisters of the Stars, the man who defied the swarm, the captain who refused to die. And as he walked forward with Lyra and Caleth at his side, the stars above seemed brighter, as if they too knew that humanity's fire would never fade.